Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Hope you guys all had a nice weekend. So, I'm glad to see there's a pretty good turnout. I guess you guys are all interested in learning about virtual fencing. I'm really excited to have three really great speakers today. Someone from Vence, someone from Halter, and then someone from the U.S. Forest Service to talk about the project going on up by Rock County. So before I want to give them as much time as possible to talk because they all have great information and slides to share with you all. A couple of programmatic updates and reminders for you guys relating to the soil health program. John didn't make it today, so it's going to be just me. So first and foremost, this is going to be our last info session this year. So the next one we hold in 2 weeks is going to be canceled. Have a reminder or follow-up email after today to cancel that, but just know this is our last one. Obviously, if you have questions or related to the program, you can reach out to us anytime. And then something else I wanted to remind folks about is that our STAR web tool is up and live, and that is something that we are asking all of your producers to fill out and get their STAR rating for. So this is a really good winter day activity. If you're going to spend the day at home, your producers are, due to weather, unable to do what they need to, they can take an hour of their time to fill out this STAR field evaluation. These are these crop field assessments that we're asking producers to fill out. So I will also send those links in my follow-up email to you guys. Other than that, I think those are the two announcements I wanted to make, and I'm going to turn it over to John from Vence. He's going to talk first, and then we'll have someone from Halter, and then we'll have Bailey Foster with the U.S. Forest Service. So John, if you want to take it away, share your screen. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, can everyone see now? I just turned that on.
Yep, I could see your screen.
All right, awesome. My name's John. I work with Vence. I'm based in Denver. I joined up with the company about 3 years ago, just when we were first starting to put our projects on the ground. And I'll take a quick 15 minutes to give a high level overview of the technology before passing it over. I think we can finish up with Bailey, who can talk about their experience actually utilizing the product on the ground. So we're a virtual fence company. Essentially, what we do is put collars on cows and then use sound and shock stimulus to influence where those animals spend their time in the landscape. Our ultimate goal, I think, is to reduce the costs associated with labor and infrastructure while at the same time enabling the types of grazing that can improve rangeland ecology, minimize any impacts to wildlife, and really introduce more flexibility and adaptability to the way that people manage, especially when we're talking about really large landscapes and the tens of thousands of acres like we have up in the mountains of Colorado, where it's really difficult to manage. I think virtual fence allows us to kind of reimagine the way that we're managing those landscapes. I like to think of the Vence system broken up into three different components. There's the collar that goes on animal. There's the base station that we use to create the network across the ranch that the collars communicate through. It's how we get data in and out of the collar. And then the third component is the herd manager software. And that's what producers will log into on their desktop computer. That's where you build your virtual fence lines and analyze any of the data that the collars are collecting. And right now that data is essentially GPS locations that are time stamped. The collar right here, let's say this is version 2.5, weighs about 2.5 pounds with a battery inside. There's a positive chain and a negative chain coming off the collar. That's actually where the electric stimulus is delivered. Two plastic links at the top. That serves as the brake in the circuit for positive and negative. It will also break off at about 650 pounds of pull force in case an animal gets hung up on a T-post, tree, anything like that from a safety mechanism. And it also prevents any abrasion. We've gone through a number of versions of the collar and we found that this plastic link at the top, and when you have a collar on for 6 to 9 months, it prevents any rubs or abrasions from occurring, which has worked really well for us. Attachment style, this has changed a few times over the years. This is what we've landed on and we think works best. It's a lock-in carabiner, basically doubles back through a loop at the top, and then you adjust for size. Inside the collar, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but the most important components to know about are a radio chip that's talks back and forth with the base station. That's how we get data in and out of the collar. Data going out is, again, those GPS locations that are time-stamped. And then data going into the collar is instructions for new virtual fence lines. So you can update what you're doing throughout the season based on changing conditions. There's also a GPS chip in the collar, and the GPS is listening to the satellite to fix the collar's location. We're not sending information back and forth with the satellite. The collar is simply listening so that it knows where it's at. 2 screws, faceplate pops out. Inside, like a battery. It looks a lot like a D-cell battery, except it's purple. It's made by a company called Tadir out of Israel. It's a military grade, like spec, high density lithium ion battery. It's basically designed to handle the temperature extremes, the hot and the cold that cows encounter in the areas that we work on. And looked at solar panels, and we looked at some of the rechargeable options out there early on in the iteration of the collars, and those can work great in certain circumstances, but we find that with range cows, like solar panels are expensive, they get dirty, they break, and there's limited efficacy in how much they charge if animals are hung up under timber, or in Kansas, they hang out in the ponds. So for those reasons, along with the temperature extremes, we went with this lithium ion battery. It's one-time use disposable, and most folks grazing seasonally, kind of the Rocky Mountain corridor, especially on public lands, are going to be that 7 to 9 month range. So the goal is to get them through the grazing season. And virtual fence, the way that we have it set up, think of it less as like a hard line in the sand where you're very clearly in and very clearly out. And we think of virtual fence more as a pressure zone. There's water pressure, feed pressure, herd pressure, topography pressure, and virtual fence is just another layer of pressure, but it's one that we can artificially control the timing and the location of, which makes it a really interesting tool. And on my computer screen here, if everyone can see, this is what it looks like in the software. You could ignore the blues, that's just pasture maps and whatnot. But the white and the red line is what a virtual fence looks like on the computer in the herd manager software. The white is the sound zone, and that's 15 yards wide as a standard setting. And the red is a sound plus shock zone, and that's 75 yards wide as a standard setting. So what that looks like is we're trying to include animals in the area where my mouse is. If they move into the sound zone, the collar emits a beep. It's basically an audio stimulus to tell them to turn around and return to the herd or return to the last known safe location. And if they continue into the sound plus shock zone, it's that same audio stimulus followed by a half-second electric pulse from the collar. We have some timeouts for animal health safety in case they get confused, hung up, anything like that. But that's that standard virtual fence line, about 300 feet of pressure overall. And again, those edges may be a little bit fuzzy just because of GPS accuracy with the consumer grade GPSs. So that pressure zone. It's also set up as a one-way gate. So let's say where my mouse is, cow's following through, and calf pulls them out, there's a storm, something like that, an animal makes it to the other side of that virtual fence. There's no pressure, so no sound, no shock. But if they want to come back and return to the herd or come back to water, they can move the opposite way through the virtual fence line. As soon as they're back inside, the virtual fence turns back on, they're passively recaptured. So we don't think of virtual fences like an iron gate that an animal is never ever going to get out of. You know, you probably have to build like a wildlife fence. Same thing with physical infrastructure. Our ultimate goal is to put the majority of the grazing pressure where we want it the majority of the time and have a positive impact using the animal as a tool to improve rangeland ecology. So we allow a little bit of permeability in the system and those animals to move back into the areas where we want them to graze. And that is in an inclusion zone. And the other virtual fence that we have is an exclusion zone. And let's say we have a riparian area, burn scar, anything like that we want to keep animals out of. Same sort of idea, except the opposite. So the animal will move towards the creek. Caller tells them through a beep to get out of there. If they continue down to the creek, they get the shock pressure to get up and get out. So that would be an exclusion zone. And we use those a lot as well. Next component is the base station. This is the infrastructure that we use to create the network across the ranch. It's made up of an aluminum hut that's about 3 foot by 4 foot. There's a solar panel and a mast that comes off it. The only ground disturbance we have are some 36-inch long kind of concrete rebar stakes that we put into the ground to make sure this doesn't blow away, as long as a copper grounding rod, as well as a copper grounding rod. And then typically where we're looking for elevation advantage, we'll raise the mast to about 20 feet. And then we have some guy wires that come out to 3 more anchor points, same exact stake that we use on the footing for the hut itself. And we'll usually put some some panels or some mesh wire around this if there's going to be a lot of traffic from wildlife or cows. But if it's up on top of a mountain and we don't see much foot traffic, then we typically don't put panels around it. 3 components of the base station system. First one is the skinny white antenna at the top. That's the LoRa or LoRaWAN antenna, and that's what creates the network across the ranch that the callers talk through. We use LoRaWAN as a radio protocol, long range, wide area network. It's a type of low power, low data radio transmission. It's what allows us to put a caller on an animal, have that caller report every half an hour, and have that battery last 6 to 9 months and provide the stimulus from the caller where it needs to. We've maxed out our radio protocol for range so we can cover as much area as we can with individual base stations. This is all built for like the Rocky Mountain Big West. Next antenna down is this skinny white one, or excuse me, this kind of trapezoid, I think, looking white one here. And that's a cellular backhaul. And that's the bridge between what's going on with the callers and then the producer's ability to access that information through the internet. We use Verizon or AT&T, T-Mobile, like whoever the reseller is in the area, like Viero. And typically base stations go up on top of the high points on the ranch. That's the area where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of network coverage. And that's typically where the cell coverage is. So knock on wood, we've been pretty successful with our cellular backhaul. We don't need cell coverage across the entire ranch. We don't need cell coverage where the callers go. The only place we need it is specifically where the base station sits. In that respect, we only need about a bar, something consistent to send out a text. We don't need 5G streaming video, anything like that. Final piece is going to be the solar panel and the batteries. The space station can be deployed wherever we can get it to and wherever we have permission to place it. Backup is about 5 days, so they can go through big storms. And we have a couple hundred of these at least deployed in the Rocky Mountain corridor, and they've held up pretty well, I got to say. They're designed to last 10 plus years. I think the longest we've had them in the field are probably 5 or 6 years up on the border of Canada and Montana right now. The golden question is always how much area does a base station cover? And the answer is it depends on topography. So we'll run what's called an RF plan for each of the projects that we have. We'll take the map of the allotment. For example, this one here is just in the Roaring Fork Valley. It's about 30,000 acres. It's a Forest Service allotment. It's pretty mountainous. You can see here, Sunlight Mountain Resort. There's a ski area, so it gives you an idea to what the topography looks like. And then we'll look at a whole bunch of individual sites. We may look at 15 and only end up going with 3 or 4 of them, but we'll certainly do an analysis for each of the projects that we work on. And then the major questions that we have for site selection are, can we access that site? Do we have permission to put a base station there? Do we have cellular connectivity at that particular site? And then are we putting coverage in the areas where the cows actually go? Sometimes, certain sections of the allotment aren't utilized and we don't necessarily need coverage there. So we'll work with the producer, whoever owns the land, and we'll kind of run through this RF plan. The colors that you see on the screen here, the orange dots, those are proposed base station locations. And then the green and the blue are our projected coverage maps. We'll take the GPS location for each of those locations. We'll run it through our tool called CloudRF, and it'll spread out these projected coverage areas where we expect to be able to communicate with the callers. The green is great. That's what we like to see. It's good coverage. We can talk to the callers. The blue is where things start to trail off a little bit less reliable, less consistent. We can still talk to the callers, but just not as well as in the green zones. We're always looking for overlap from multiple base stations. And then you'll also notice we have some dead zones here. It just looks like plain old Google Earth, low zones and canyons, anything like that. The range on a base station is really good. We model out to a 10-mile radius. That's where, again, we're consistent and reliable, but we can't violate the laws of physics and go through a mountain or down into a gully. So line of sight's a good rule of thumb, though we're a bit better than line of sight because of radio signals. But we'll still end up on most ranges with certain dead zones in certain areas that are a little bit tricky to put coverage in. And we fully expected this building a product for the American West. So what we're able to do is still run a virtual fence line through these areas. We could follow my mouse north to south. And as long as you download the instruction for the virtual fence line into the caller, The collar's memory says, hey, thumbs up, I've got that instruction, I'm good to go. It can go down into these areas where you don't have coverage. And because the collar has the instruction in its memory, and because it's listening to the GPS to fix its location, you'll still get the sound, you'll still get the shock just like you're supposed to. So we're still able to operate in these areas where we have limited coverage in certain situations. The only thing you're not going to get is the location data coming off the collar or the ability to make a change to the virtual fence line. The caller will be sending out half an hour increment location data whenever it's doing its standard thing out in the field. So we get semi-live data as where the animal is at. And in those dead zones, the caller's still sending it out. We're just not there to receive it. And since we can't receive it, we can't make any changes. You just got to wait till the caller comes back into the green zone. So more coverage, more flexibility and adaptability in the system, less coverage, we can still operate. You just make some sacrifices. And then the last piece is the herd manager software. This is what a producer will log into. It's a web-based platform. It's where you build your virtual fence lines, analyze any of the data. You can get battery update alerts, associate ear tag IDs with the animal and the collar so that you can manage down to specific animals. There's a little bit better view. The cow icons are your collar locations, and those can be different colors to mean different things. For example, does this collar have the most recent update that I sent it? Or is this location data point pretty fresh and 5 minutes old? Or is it more stale and 6 or 7 hours old? Different ways to visualize the data. And then the last piece here I want to point out is we hold all of the location data, and you can run heat maps and individual tracking location back in the herd manager software to see where the animals are putting pressure and spending time in the landscape and potentially where they're underutilizing it. And you can use this location data for a whole host of different things. Last slide I'll share. This is where we're at in the United States. We have some operations in Australia as well. This map's a little bit old, so we have some more pins here, but you can see where mainly the Rocky Mountain corridor and west, that's kind of like where our bread and butter is. We're built for big Western rangeland management, think Forest Service and BLM on the tens of thousands of acres. So that's where the product does really well. We have some operations in Florida on the East Coast, but we don't do more of the hyper-intensive rotational grazing. It's more bigger Western rangeland type management. And there's a whole lot more where this came from, but I think for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and pass it over at this point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Does anybody have any questions specifically about Vence for John? We do have like a stacked agenda for our 1 hour meeting. So if there are any brief questions, we're happy to take them now in like the next minute or two. Otherwise, we'll transition over to Austin with Halter.
What does a replacement battery cost?
Batteries are $10 per unit. So the pricing infrastructure is pretty simple. Base stations you purchase up front, you own the base stations, there's no recurring fees, $10,000 for a self-install, which the majority of private producers will do, $12,500 if you want us to send out one of our guys to kind of come help and facilitate the deployment. And then the collars are on a subscription model, we call it. It's $40 per collar per year. You can use it for 6 months, 12 months, doesn't matter. It's just that $40. It includes all the software, all the customer support, and includes a working collar. So if you have one that breaks, has an electrical failure, whatever happens, we'll replace that collar for no fee. And then the batteries are just 10 bucks a pop. And most folks in Colorado will graze seasonally and they'll use one battery per year, call it $50 per collar. Some folks will be grazing year round, maybe like 2 or 1.5 batteries per year.
Cool. Jenny, who's based out on the Eastern Plains, wanted to know, can Vence be used on goats?
No goats at this point. Everything is design, fitment wise, brake force wise around cattle at this point. I think long term, we'd love to have different ruminant species or grazing species involved with collaring. And we've proven it out on some bison and some sheep. The technology works. It just becomes a fitment and design issue. So in the future, I think, but not in the near term.
That's good to know. And then for the sake of time, this will be our last question. Is there a minimum number of cattle per producer?
Not necessarily a minimum number. I think our like kind of rough number we've used in the past is about 200. And part of the reason we do that is because the economics scale well when you have a larger herd for like a commercial setting. And then also we have a lot of interest from folks on the East Coast. that maybe have 50 or 100 acres and they have, 15, 20 animals. And we'd love to be able to provide service, but the technology doesn't really work there. So that 200 animal is sort of like a filter that we use sometimes in the lead process because we have a lot of folks reaching out to us. But we certainly have projects in the mountains where we have network infrastructure from the Forest Service that covers, X number of allotments. And someone may have 500 animals and the other person may have 100. And we're happy to work with all those folks, especially when they're part of a larger project, as long as it's the
Great.
right use case. Yeah,
Yeah, very much context dependent.
exactly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you. Austin, if you want to start sharing your screen and start your presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I can get this working. Go. You know what? I have to quit and rejoin the meeting. That's my mistake. I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I guess while we're waiting for Austin, does anybody else have like general questions for John? I guess I had a question. One of your slides earlier, John, you mentioned that, like the autonomous, like even when they're out of range, is that just because of the programming? Like if they're in a dead zone, like it is still active and will direct them back into a zone? Or how
Exactly.
does that work?
We mean autonomous in the sense that even if it's not talking to a base station, the caller will have the instructions stored in its memory and it'll be listening to GPS, so you still get the sound and the shock. So we can operate in those rough terrain areas, and then it'll just continue to communicate as soon as it gets back into coverage. So we use that term
Very cool.
autonomous. Yeah, each individual caller has its own instructions in it individually.
Awesome. I did not know that. I thought, yeah, once they wandered off, they were in a dead zone, they were just like kind of lost. So it's good to know.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I see your slides now, Austin. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, John, for the presentation, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Austin Kohler. I've been with Halter for about 4 months now, and I oversee Colorado and the west side of the states here. Little background on myself. I grew up in Nebraska on a cow-calf pair in Nebraska. I attended the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and I moved to Denver about 5 years ago, where I've been involved in some tech companies. But truth be told, I wanted to get back into the ranching lifestyle, and Halter was just the perfect combination of tech and ranching for myself. And then a little bit on Halter. I understand it's probably a newer technology that for a lot of you. So Halter is New Zealand founded. We're live in Australia and the US currently. We're focusing on about 12 different key states right now. We've been live in the US since early 2024, and we have nearly 300,000 callers on cows across the globe right now. So today I'm just gonna briefly walk through Halter's history, about the caller functionality, and then just some of the benefits we have seen in virtual fencing. So as we can see, obviously, here's one of our callers on one of the cows here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So Halter was formally founded in 2016 by Craig Pickett, but Halter's story truly begins on a small dairy farm in New Zealand with a much younger Craig Pickett. Craig spent most of his childhood behind dairy cows, moving them from pasture to pasture and from milking shed back and forth there. And he knew there was a more efficient way to contain and shift and rotate cows. So we fast forward to 2016, that idea actually became a reality when he started Halter. Though we've seen no shortage of challenges in the last 8 years, we believe in a world where pasture-based ranches are more productive, profitable, and sustainable. And if we focus on the words profitable and sustainable, that's where the mission kind of gets tricky. And because often to do either one can be fairly straightforward, you want to be more sustainable, just drop cattle numbers. The problem is that's not necessarily profitable. So at the heart of both of these is the words pasture. We believe that grazing management is the biggest the biggest lever in achieving the elusive balancing act of profitability and sustainability. So if you're familiar with the New Zealand cattle market, you'll know that 80% of the cattle in New Zealand are dairy cows. You'll also know that 100% of the cattle in New Zealand are grass-fed and grass-finished. So in order to develop a product that would meet the needs of the market with such high standards, we knew we needed to provide a tool that would contain and shift cows as good as farmers were doing it but for half the cost. So the journey to develop a product that could contain cows down to the inch and shift cows with the press of a button was not an easy one, but it's led us to the collar here. So a little bit about the collar functionality. There are two core features to the collar that has helped us get to where we are now. And the first being solar panels. So solar is kind of the secret for us. It simply means it's an unlimited power supply. So as you can imagine, having a computer on a cow can be quite power hungry. So the only way to do this is with an unlimited power supply, hence solar. So really what that means is once the collar goes on, it doesn't come off. The second core feature that has really helped us get to where we are today is remote updatability. So this essentially means that when we release a new feature and the functions, the collar that you have on your cows are going to receive that update and be able to do these updated features and functions that we've just released. Again, just a testimony to once the collar goes on, it stays on. In terms of how the collar actually works, we have the ability to directionally guide cows. And I'm going to use the collar here to kind of give an example of that. So essentially for containment, if a cow needs to turn left in order to avoid a virtual fence line, the right side beeps. Again, if the cow needs to turn right, the left side beeps. And through that, we actually have the ability to directionally guide your cow. Another thing is when the cow gets closer or the collar gets closer to the virtual fence line, the collar's audio increases in both volume and frequency. It's just like if a pickup truck were backing up against a wall. So we increase in volume and frequency. And then to actually shift the cows, the vibration is the positive cue that the cows learn during training. And essentially what this means is it promotes them to walk forward. So when you draw a new brake and the collar encourages the cow to face the direction of the new brake, then the collar will actually vibrate, encouraging the cow to walk forward, associating that cue with new food. A little more technical things is our collars and our software. It's all mobile app based, so you just pull it up from your phone. We also have an operating website as well. The collars do have a brake system involved if something were to get snug up on a tree or a twig, of about 650 pounds of force to brake. In terms of reliability and how long collars have been on, we've had collars on since 2018 that have yet to be replaced. Our warranty is pretty simple. If a collar breaks in the field, it's our fault for not building a good enough collar, so we replace it on us. And in terms of transmission on towers, we do use towers. That way we can access those tougher Rocky Mountain areas, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. We have towers that are just built of 3 parts. It's a communications box, a solar panel, and a 9-meter shaft. These can be placed on a side-by-side or, on horse saddle pads, and it really only takes about 15 minutes to put up just one person. So that's a little bit on the collar. And then one other thing I always like to point out is our collars actually have the ability to understand cows' behavior in a way. So what I always like to say is that we can contain and shift cows as a herd. However, we understand cows as individuals. And essentially what that means is we all on here probably have those fence jumpers that typically like to find their way out of the fence. So what we've been able to do is understand those cows' behaviors. And the third cue on the collar is a low energy electrical pulse. And essentially what that means is if a cow decides to step out of that virtual line, it's going to be giving some amount of time until it receives the negative cue of that low energy electric pulse. What happens when a cow steps outside of that virtual fence line is the priority is to directionally guide it back into the break with the voice cues. However, if for some reason it's decided to ignore those cues, it will receive that negative cue. The dynamic learning feature actually understands, is this someone that is always testing that fence line, is always stepping out? If that's the case, their time to receive that negative cue is actually going to be a lot quicker, as opposed to maybe a mom who always stays in that containment area that just happened to step out or get bullied out. She might have 30 to 45 seconds, whereas a fence jumper might only have about 15 to 10 seconds. So the next thing here is just an example of the precision aspect that we have. So this picture is actually of a graze line that one of our producers in New Zealand is using to strip graze one of their fields. And so when we talk about the precision aspect of our virtual line, we talk in a matter of inches. You know, telling cattle where to be can be powerful, but also just as powerful is telling cattle where not to be. So we've seen producers use this technology to stay away from larkspur, stay away from cattails or riparian areas. But in this case, we are using the technology to strip graze very intensely one of our fields. And we work with producers anywhere from 100 acres to 60,000 acres, both on that very intense rotational grazing, all the way up to just needing to rotate big pastures in the Forest Service land, something of that sorts. Joining the Halter journey is pretty straightforward. Essentially, we come and take a land assessment of your land to kind of understand what we're working with, but more importantly, we take the consultative approach of wanting to understand what are your goals so we can best design the technology to work best for you to achieve those goals. We work closely, you work closely with our team all the way up to deployment. And our support team is 24/7. We've never had a rancher wait longer than just 2 minutes to work with an actual human. So our next picture here is a pretty fun one. This is of Mushrush Ranch in Kansas. And this is actually a drone image that was taken this morning of the rancher using this technology to rotationally graze his cover crops right now. So you can kind of see a depiction here of the manure spread here, a very intense graze line here. And again, this is actually on cover crops here in Kansas taken this morning. So one exercise I always love to do when I'm talking with my producers is imagine you had infinite fencing and infinite labor available at your fingertips. How would you design and draw your pastures to see the most results that you're looking for? This is possible with virtual fencing. Sometimes referred to as infinite fencing because it actually gives you the ability to infinitely fence what you're trying to accomplish here. So here's an example of one of our producers in New Zealand actually overlooking his land, and we've taken what he's done in the app and put it in this picture. Obviously never would have been possible with just physical fence. So that pretty much wraps it up for me, guys. I know that was pretty short, but again, just wanted to give you an understanding of who I am, who Halter is, of what we do, how we do it. And here's my contact information if you have any more questions that I may not get to here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Austin. Does anybody have any questions specifically for Austin? There's a question in the chat from Annalisa. Can you tell us more about the collar training process?
Yeah, absolutely. The collar training process, it's pretty simple. Obviously, this is a stressful time for the cows, but the cows, after training, very much learn to rely on the collars, and we essentially wean them off of what they're used to containing and shifting with onto the collars. It's funny, but I always say after training, the collars become their compass. What training happens, it's essentially a 7 to 14 day process where we collar the cows and then we train them in more of a a smaller area. So we get them interacting with the collar, understanding the cues and what those means. And shortly after, and as little as we've seen 3 days, we've seen as long as 14 days. Every ranch is different, but sometimes on average, about 7 to 10 days, the cows are successfully trained onto using the collars for containment and shifting.
Awesome. Annie had a question, and I guess John could chime in here too. She wants to know, do these collars work off of Vence base stations, vice versa? Like, is there any collaboration between Vence and Halter?
Yeah, John, I saw you unmuted. I'll let you.
Yeah, no I mean, I assume honestly you guys use LoRaWAN as well, right?
That's right.
So from a technical perspective, they probably would be able to hear each other talking, but you have to have the key to access the network, and then the backend infrastructure is all different. So no collaboration, unfortunately, between base stations.
And she was also wondering about the cost, I guess, between your two products.
Absolutely. I'll touch on halters. Obviously, every ranch is going to be different, but our prices range from $60 to $80. It's similar in the sense that our pricing mechanism or our pricing model is very straightforward. When it comes to the collar, we actually just give you the collar. You don't pay for the hardware. It is yours to keep. What you're paying for is a $60 to $80 subscription to use the software, to use the technology, and that is just an annual subscription price per collar.
Great, thanks so much. Any other questions?
I guess I probably didn't answer all that. The towers too, I probably should have mentioned the towers are $4,500 with Halter too. Great.
Okay, if there's no other questions, for the sake of time, I want to give Bailey her fair share. If you want to share your screen, Bailey, and get started, and that way you also have a couple minutes for questions at the end. Thanks so much, John and Austin.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Lisa, for giving me the time to speak today. And John and Austin, those were great. I hadn't heard the Halter presentation before, so that was super interesting. So my name's Bailey. I work on the Hans Peak Bears Ears district of the Medicine Bow Route National Forest. So I'm located in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, Route County. And I'm just going to tell you kind of what our experience has been working with virtual fence. We worked with Vence, and I'll explain why here in a minute, and then just kind of go over some funding mechanisms that we've used or maybe interested in the future, and some lessons learned. So here we go. So our area is kind of rugged. We are in aspen woodland mostly for our grazing land at an elevation between 7,000 and 12,000 feet. And we're actually primarily sheep in this area. So I only have a few cattle permittees. So it's kind of been really fun to work with them because I'm usually out doing sheep stuff. We got started kind of in 2022. So we went to this field tour in Burns, Colorado with Christy Woolner. And I'd kind of heard about virtual fencing, but when I saw her presentation and saw what they were able to do in somewhat similar terrain, I was like, well, we can do this too. And I'm guessing some of you guys were probably at that field tour as well. I know John was, because that's where we met. And he helped me kick off our virtual fencing here. And at the time, Vence was really kind of the only one at scale that could support our area. And so we did a sole source contract bid with them. So with the federal government, you can't do anything without some sort of process like NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. Fortunately, though, the Forest Service, as of right now, is not requiring really any NEPA other than a couple checks with our lands and heritage people. With lands, they just need to check that there's no radio frequency issues with other comm sites in the area. And then heritage naturally needs to ensure that there's nothing that will be destroyed by the stakes. So this photo actually is just south of, or just north of Hans Peak. If anyone's familiar with that, there's an old fire lookout station, which would have been a really great spot to put that base station. But Heritage decided they didn't want this shiny metal structure up there detracting from that. So we moved it down a little bit and it was fine. I mentioned contracting before. So if the Forest Service or any agency is using federal dollars, we do have to go through a contracting process. So in the future, as other companies become like larger and able to take on the scale of these, it will go out to bid for anyone. So if you are a producer or someone who's interested in using federal dollars, keep that in mind that you may need to work with your folks in the agencies to kind of navigate that system. Installation for us has been variable. John helped us find some pretty easy sites to access and some not as easy sites to access. Our first year, our first year was fine mostly. The challenge there, we had more private land holders that are absentee landholders. So the Steamboat area, they were just not interested in helping us with access or allowing base stations on their property. So we kind of turned towards this, you can see a mobile unit in the middle. So that's actually one that the permittee did, but we used one similar to that on the forest. Just like John said, we would take it to a water location so all of the cows would ping if we had to change their fence line. And that worked fairly well. I mean, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it helped solve that problem with access over there and then the topography. The second year, this year, was pretty challenging. We have a lot of roadless on our district. Almost half of it actually more than half of it is roadless or wilderness. So we were able to utilize the Region 2 pack string. They're out of Cody, Wyoming. So that's this top picture here and these guys down here as well. So they packed in sites for us, which was pretty fun. Their feedback was, you could see the solar panel is pretty awkward. So if there's a chance in the future to split those solar panels up for packing, that would be helpful. And got a couple quick clips of us putting things together. I'm guessing some folks on this call have done this before, but it's kind of like an IKEA furniture build. We disappear here because we lost a tool or forgot a tool, which happened a lot. Second part of that. And the first one took us quite a while to build, just kind of stumbling through it. But once you get it down, they're really not bad. And here's our field installation with one of the virtual fence technicians. He helped us with our first one to just get our feet under us. And then once we felt more comfortable, we were able to do the installations ourselves. One thing to note, you can see the snow here. We decided to take the batteries out last fall of these stations just to kind of give them a little more life over the winter. But that ended up being a real problem this spring when we could not access our sites before the cattle needed to go onto the forest. So we started the grazing season without our virtual fencing, which was kind of a bummer. So this year we're leaving the batteries in, and I know that's something that can be done. So we'll see how it goes. This last little video is from the permittee, them collaring. And I think this is one of JP's first cows that he collared. So it's probably an average time that it takes. Not too bad. And he's got that older model where it doesn't have the carabiner. But yeah, so it's really not super time consuming. Of course, if you have 500 cows you're doing, it is going to be a day. Here's our current coverage. So all of the blue lines are allotments. And then John explained what the other colors are. So we're at about 500,000 acre coverage. A lot of it is off forest, which is fine with me. If other folks can take advantage of this tool, all the better. And there's only a few allotments that are cattle not covered right now. And they haven't decided that this tool's right for them. I would say it's kind of based on the operation size, and then your grazing season. So we're super short up here. We've got most turnout is around July 4th, and the most people come off the beginning of October. But for the surrounding land, you can see the low country, private ranches down there. This could be really helpful for long season. So I mentioned funding a little earlier. The funding from our partners has really shaped what our goals for virtual fencing has been. So rather than just being a tool to track your cattle and keep them in a certain area, we've had real management goals to focus on. So the first has been really geared towards wildlife habitat. And we've got some elk severe winter range over in this area, and then this big awkward migration corridor. And so we've been trying to move cattle out of these areas earlier in the season into other parts of the allotment so that we can preserve fall forage for the elk as they're, moving on their way or getting ready for winter. And so we've worked with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and CPW's Habitat Partnership Program for these funds. And they have been our largest partner to date, which has been really awesome. And they've been really great to work with. We've also worked with Colorado Ag Water Alliance. So resting riparian areas has been a big goal of ours. And we've fenced out, we had an exclosure on a stream restoration site. And we felt like that worked really well the past couple of years. And then the permittee actually came up with a plan to rest another stream. And he just is going to rest an exclosure each year and work his way up just to give everywhere a little bit of a break from livestock. And then this year, we got a fair bit of funding from the fuels program with the Forest Service, and they wanted us to focus on targeted grazing for herbaceous fuel removal in the wildland urban interspace. And it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around because I see our forest and it's woody, it's forested, there's a ton of trees. So like, how is grazing herbaceous going to do anything? But yeah, sure, if you give us the money, we'll do it. And we got the fuels folks out there and they kind of explained to me, like, in 90% of fire scenarios, this is going to give them several hours more to potentially respond to an incident for suppression. And in this area, the full suppression response time is at least 3 hours. So even just a little bit of targeted grazing can do a lot of good. Like, it's not going to stop or put out the fire, but it gives firefighters a chance to have a safe place to fight from. So kind of overall, to put that together, we were pretty happy with the GPS technology. Every permittee so far that's been like their biggest thing that they were stoked about, is being able to know where the cows are before they go to the forest. We were happy with the battery life, that they lasted as long as we needed on our allotments. Our goals, some of them we could measure right out the gate, like preserving forage for wildlife and then that fuel removal. But the longer term things like the riparian areas, of course, we need more time and data on that. But we felt that the fences have kept the cows out, at least 91% of the time, which is better than physical fence around here. As you saw some of those pictures, we have a lot of trees and they come down every day. And if it's not the trees, it's the elk. If it's not the elk, it's the snow. So it's worked really well for us. Of course, there are issues, as with anything, especially new and growing technology. John already kind of talked about some of these. The biggest frustrations we had were more last year. There were some collars that would reset and turn off without notice. And then the GPS lagging is kind of confusing. Like, you'll see your cow 30 miles away and then bounce back. And that's just a growing pain we've had to adjust with. We had a couple hardware problems. One of our solar panels was destroyed by snowmobiles. And another one, it seems like it blew off with high winds. Our engineer kind of took a look at it and he helped us reinforce the solar panel, but that's something to keep in mind if you're in some really rugged places. So real quick, I'll just go over the funding. That's always a question that we get. I've mentioned several of these already. The one I didn't, CSU Extension has been able to provide funding for interns for us. And without those interns, I don't think there's any way I could have done this alone. So that's been really great. And then I can't not mention Route County Conservation District. They were really supportive of me through this process. They connected us with this CAWA grant, and then they've done a ton of work in the southern part of the county, kickstarting some of virtual fencing. Some things we haven't tried yet, and it's super new, I think, to this year. NRCS EQIP program is beginning to pay for virtual fencing, and similar to other federal agencies, they're open to any kind of virtual fencing company that works for you and for them. It's a 5-year contract. You will have to do like a grazing plan or some other, wildlife benefit, etc. They are covering a 50 to 60% subsidization. 90% if you're underserved or beginning farmer, and payments in years 2 and 5 will support ongoing subscription costs. This next one's pretty grainy, but I took this straight from their EQIP cost list. So looks like they broke it out between herd size. And then they also have a separate payment plan for sheep and goat. And you can access this if you just Google NRCS EQIP funding, and you can search all of their payment plans. Another one that's kind of growing is soil carbon. We haven't done anything with this yet, but people have asked about it. I've found grassroots carbon seems to be one of the big ones doing this. They have some bare minimum requirements. So you have to have cattle, you have to have over 500 acres of qualifying land, and then you need to be practicing or considering regenerative agriculture. I'm guessing these 500 acres can include federal leases, but I'm not sure. And then the other one of my permittees is exploring is Kateri. And they also will help you pay for virtual fencing of any kind. I saw that they have worked with Movement and Vence, and I'm sure they're working with other partnerships in the future. The big thing I found with them was that you have to have improvements to your soil carbon. So if you're already doing a really good job with management, it might not be the best program for you. And so just kind of to wrap it up, there's no way we could have done this without partners. So if funding is a challenge, you need to get creative with how you're going to use these tools. It can't just be like a standard fence. You need to be using cattle as a tool to help improve land management. And that to me makes it more fun. Like, what can we do with this? What are our limitations? Are there any limitations? It's been pretty fun. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks, Bailey. Yeah, any questions for Bailey? Okay, I'll start. I guess with the producers that you work with, how quickly do they pick up like using the software? Like, is it pretty challenging in the beginning for them to learn and then like move their animals, or do you feel like the learning curve is actually not too bad?
I think Vence does a pretty good job. They have a lot of like front end things. I'm actually really not involved with that at all. We try to separate the data from the hardware. So the Forest Service, we can be FOIA'd. So we don't want to share the location of the livestock. So that all really stays on the rancher side. But no one has really complained. I know some of them, it's like, that's what my daughter's job is. She does all of that stuff. And then I'll go ride and look for the cows. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's been a real problem.
Cool. Alrighty. Does anybody have any other questions for any of our speakers? I know we had like a really full lineup today in our 1 hour, so don't want to keep you guys longer than we have to if there are no other questions. Alrighty, I guess we don't have any more questions, we can end here. Just a reminder, this webinar is recorded. I will send it out once it's finished processing. And also, in case you missed it at the very, very beginning, this is our last info session of the year. So we will not have our next scheduled one in 2 weeks. It'll be January 6th is our next one. So thank you so much, everyone, for making the time to attend. I hope this was educational and informative for you. And yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.